Hello, my lovelies. I know you've opened up your work this morning and gone, oh, please, Lord, no more poetry. But just think, after this week, there's only 2 more weeks. There's not much I can put you through, really, honestly. And I promise you, you will be very grateful for the time that we spent doing all the poems, getting most of them out of the way. We're going to save one till next year. Um, to be honest with you, it's because I hate Wordsworth with a passion. And so we'll do him in September when I'm not feeling so tired and grumpy because of the hot weather. Um, yeah. Okay, so we're going to have a look at Ode to Autumn by John Keats. I have to confess that I teach this for A-level. It is a beautiful poem, but it is more beautiful when you know kind of a little bit more about John Keats' story. And kind of every year I sort of end up in a situation where I have to kind of water it down. But as you're incredibly clever and a super smart set one, I'm not going to water it down that much from what we would do at A-level and how we would look at it. Okay, so Ode to Autumn by John Keats. Okay, it is what's known as an ode, okay, and that's a particular type of poem. It's a lyrical poem. The idea is it's kind of a song in praise of someone or something. It is also considered what's known as a pastoral poem, and that's a work of literature that idealizes or fantasizes a bit about rural life. It doesn't show you the realities of rural life, okay? Keats was one of what we would call the romantic poets with a capital R. And when we finish them, when we've done Shelley and then we've done Wordsworth next term, I'll kind of go into a little bit more about what kind of hooks them together. But I do need to explain some of it as we're going through this. The idea of the Romantics is they were challenging, they were revolutionary poets. What they'd done was, in the first wave of them, you've seen Blake and London, they were looking at how human beings were being taken away from nature, put into cities and towns and made to behave in a kind of unnatural way. Now, Blake was one of the early ones. The later ones are people like Keatsy Boy here, and we've looked at Byron, She Walks in Beauty. So you can see what has happened is it's developed as a movement, the Romantic movement. It is still looking at nature, and if you think of She Walks in Beauty, he's challenging ideas of nature itself, our perspective of what's beautiful. The girl in She Walks in Beauty is absolutely stunningly gorgeous, but she doesn't fit that stereotype that there is of being this kind of blue-eyed blonde English rose character. Okay, so what Byron is doing there, he's looking at nature. Now, in To Autumn, as its title might suggest, it is actually looking at autumn itself. Okay, it was written after Keats had taken a walk around Winchester, which, if you've never been, is a very, very beautiful place, even now, you know, a couple of 100 years on. Very gorgeous, bit kind of, it looks like a painting come to life, Winchester. Okay, now both the style of poem, the ode, and also the pastoral is a kind of the content of a poem. So odes and pastorals have their origins in ancient Greece, and this is where it's all going to get a little bit A-level for you, my sweets. Okay, right. Keats felt that it's impossible for us to find answers to the eternal questions that we all have about human existence. Now, I do understand you're sitting there going, do you know what, Mrs. Perrin, I'm 15. My only questions about my human existence are what's going to happen with my tea, how much chocolate and pocket money, and what a new trainer's going to look like. I understand that. However, we do all have questions about human existence. What is it? What is it for? Why are we here? Oh dear, don't think too much. That will wreck your heads. And of course, we're not in school to discuss it fully. But what Keats felt was that our feelings and our imaginations help enable us to recognise beauty. And it is beauty that helps us through life's bleak or dreadful moments. Okay. Keats was very concerned with the concept of beauty itself. Where do we find it? What does it look like? How do we celebrate it? How do we revel in it? So on and so forth, okay? And sometimes it's this idea that even when life is truly dreadful, and it gets that way for all of us at times, and that you think, do you know what, I don't think I can even take my next breath, let alone put one foot in front of the other. What Keats would suggest is, in those moments, you look for something beautiful. And that can be anything. It can be a person, it can be words, it can be an image, it can be anything. You go and find beauty. Okay? He believed very much that life involves a delicate balance between times of pleasure and pain. Okay? And that as human beings, we need to learn to accept both aspects. Now, what he actually said about this is beauty is truth and truth beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know, which is the last couple of lines of the poem called Ode on a Grecian Urn in 1819. They were all written around the same time. There are these kind of big odes that he wrote, and actually not far off his death, but we'll go into his context a little bit more. Okay, so the idea is that he believed that the truth of this world is what is beautiful. Okay, and we don't all find the same things beautiful, do we? That phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, was around when Keats was around, okay? It's a very old idea. And so whatever we find that's beautiful, so that's a friend, when you're feeling sad, a friend who makes you a cup of tea, shares a bit of chocolate with you, or whatever, that is a moment of truth and beauty because it's to do with friendship. Okay, now what Keats called this idea of finding beauty in the most kind of painful moments in our lives, he called it negative capability. That even though we were kind of experiencing pain, we could find the beauty in it, the truth of it. Does that make sense? Possibly not. But at the end of the day, this is A-level-y type stuff, this concept of negative capability. And you'd be amazed how many sixth formers sit there going, mind blown, that's scary thoughts. But if you can get your head around it, it does help enormously with understanding some of the really quite complex ideas that are going on in Ode to Autumn. Okay, this business of beauty and truth working together. Okay, now our capability is to see beauty in pain. Okay, and the negative bit is, okay, I'm in pain, but I can still see beauty. Does that make sense? Does that break it down any further for you? Probably not. You might need to rewind that, and I do apologise, but I absolutely refuse to water Keatsy boy down. Okay. Okay, let's have a look at his context. Oh, bless him. He had family problems from when he was young. He was the eldest of the children. His father had or ran a livery stable, which is where people keep their horses and things like that. It actually belonged to his mother, but when his dad died when he was very young, Keats's mum remarried awfully quickly. That kind of, you know, those moments where your mother would arrive with somebody brand new and you think, oh, they've not even finished putting, you know, the soil over the coffin. She marries this bloke. He is horrible to them, so she runs away with the children. Now, what that did was she left her business, okay? So she was absolutely penniless. She had no legal means to get the business back. The thing about those times was that women did not own their own money. It wasn't until the late 1870s that women were legally allowed to say, that's mine, and you're not allowed to touch it. Okay, so this is written way before that. So when his mom left this very abusive man, she had to leave everything with him. Okay, when young Keatsy boy was training, when he kind of left school, he trained as a surgeon, and he was training in kind of the slums of London, really very, very difficult, poverty-stricken parts of London, the parts of London that Dickens introduces us to. Okay, and you can imagine that if you're a hospital in those areas, you can't afford things like, you know, anaesthetic. So the lad, very sensitive, poetic little soul, was learning to cut people up without any sort of anaesthetic. The only thing that people used to have was like a leather strap to bite onto, as you know, their legs being amputated or whatever. But it became too much for him. It began to have really quite serious consequences for his mental health. Okay. What he wanted to be was a great poet. He was desperate to do this, bless him. And he was absolutely fascinated by classical literature. By classical literature, I do mean ancient Greek and Roman texts, okay? He also had a great passion for Shakespeare, okay? And what he did was he tried to educate himself to the standard of his friends, who'd all come from wealthier families. They'd all been to very posh schools, and classical education is still an integral part of their normal education. So they knew all these stories and all these kind of structures of how you create a poem and things like that. And he felt very intimidated by them all. And he was great friends with all the Romantic poets. So they used to meet together quite regularly. Okay, so you can imagine him sitting there and they're all chattering away about this, that and the other. And he's not got a clue. It must be like being a kid who has no social media coming to school. Okay. He was constantly broke. He was always looking for a way to earn money. Now, in Keats's time, it was quite fashionable to be a poet. And if you were a celebrated poet, you could earn lots of money. They were a bit like, I don't know, the rock stars or the football players of today. They really were. I know you're sitting there thinking, well, that's truly sad. You can tell they had no television. However, they were invited to perform at house parties and were paid lots of money. They were invited to perform at literary evenings. People, believe it or not, they still happen. People go and listen to poets reciting their work and talking about it. Okay, but in his lifetime, bless him, nobody really recognized just how amazing he was. Okay. There was also what they used to call in those days consumption in his family. We now call it TB or tuberculosis, and it is eminently curable with antibiotics, but of course that's before all that began. He watched his siblings die of it. Okay, he nursed his brother Tom just before these poems were written, and particularly Ode to Autumn. Tom had died. Tom was younger than him, and Keatsy boy had done everything humanly possible to try and keep his brother alive, all right? And the other thing, as you see here, it says it's not written long before his death. In those days, when you started with a particular cough and you began to cough up blood, you knew you were dying. It was just a matter of time. Very, very few people survived consumption, okay? He ended up going to Italy in order to try desperately to get better. There was a theory around that the warmer, drier air of the Mediterranean could prolong your life a little bit. And he lived in these little rooms, bless him, in Italy. And he died. And some friends kind of clubbed together to create a little memorial, a little tombstone for him. But he'd written his own words, his own inscription. And it's one of the saddest things that gets me every time, bless him. He died not knowing how good he is, all right, or was. And so the inscription that he had them write on his tombstone is, "Here lies one whose name is writ in water." That's so sad, isn't it? If you're not too sure the reality of what that means, run a bowl of water, guys, and try and write your name and see if it stays there, okay? Okay, the ode. It follows the basic structure of what were the original odes, and they first appeared in Greek drama. So you're talking something that's thousands of years old. And so what we're seeing is the examples of Keats learning. He's desperately trying to teach himself here. So what he's chosen is the structure of an ancient Greek ode. Okay. Now, they actually weren't poems initially. As you can see, they were part of plays. And the way that it works, it would be broken into three sections: the strophe, the antistrophe, and the epode. In Greek drama, they would have a chorus of singers or chanters who commented on and provided context for the action of the play. None of them sitting there going, what the heck's going on? Very shortly, a Greek chorus would appear, and they'd start telling you what has happened, what is going to happen, what are the characters thinking. Okay, so in the strophe, the members of the chorus would sing on stage right to stage left. So they're going to stand on one side of the stage and they'd sing. And what that represents is kind of the passage of time. Okay, and it would present an argument. Oh, this is what's going on in ancient Greece at the moment. Okay, in the antistrophe, they sing from left to right. But what here they're doing is they're providing another perspective on that argument. And in the epode, which is the last bit, they chant together, commenting conclusively on the theme of the two preceding arguments. Okay, it's all very complicated, but basically all you need to do is to remember the idea of the structure of them. Okay. To autumn follows the general movement. In stanza 1, the strophe, the poem presents a view of autumn's vivid abundance. In stanza 2, the antistrophe, autumn is seen from the perspective of the harvest and a form of death. And in stanza 3, the epode, the life of the first stanza and death of the second are combined in animals that are lively, but nevertheless awaiting winter and death. And he knew he was dying when he wrote this. So you can see that even though he's dealing with kind of getting in the harvest and the abundance and the idea it produces food for going into the next year, death is never far. His poems that he wrote during 1819 all echo with the same kind of sort of voice coming through them. Death is not far away. All right? He knows he's got consumption at this point. So let's have a look at those Greek words. This is me kind of educating you. There's bits of this are just really important for the exam, for your exam, and bits are like, no, you're not escaping me, you're going to be educated. A strophe literally means to turn or to twist, okay? We have the strophe in the Greek drama, and that is kind of saying, well, this is going to happen, there's going to be these passages of time, and again it will tell you in the Greek drama, it's kind of a bit of a spoiler alert really, these twists and turns are going to take place in this narrative. All right, then you have the antistrophe, or the antistrophe, sorry, and that's when they're on the other side of the stage, and if you remember, they're moving back and they're making comments about what's going on, so on and so forth. You might be saying, why on earth is she prattling on about this? Look what's truly relevant to this poem. And then we have the apostrophe. Can you remember from Cozy Apologia or Apologia, or however you want to pronounce it, it's an apostrophe. It's an ancient Greek idea of speaking to somebody directly who is outside the text. It's not a pondering on a situation, it's to someone. And here, the poem from its title says, to autumn. It is an apostrophe. So it's following exactly the same kind of rules and lines that Dove has with that beautiful poem of Hare and Fred sheltering from a hurricane. Okay?
Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run, to bend with apples the mossed cottage trees, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core, to swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells with a sweet kernel, to set budding more and still more later flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has o'erbrimmed their clammy cells. Who hath not seen thee oft amid thy store? Sometimes whoever seeks abroad may find thee sitting careless on a granary floor, thy hair soft lifted by the winnowing wind, or in a half-reaped furrow sound asleep, drowsed with the fume of poppies, while thy hook spares the next swathe and all its twined flowers. And sometimes like a gleaner thou dost keep steady thy laden head across a brook, or by a cider press with patient look thou watchest the last oozings hours by hours. Where are the songs of spring? Ay, where are they? Think not of them. Thou hast thy music too. While barred clouds bloom the soft dying day, and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue, then in a wailful choir the small gnats mourn among the river sallows, borne aloft or sinking as the light wind lives or dies. And full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne, hedge crickets sing, and now with treble soft, The redbreast whistles from a garden croft, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies.
So let's have a look at the structure of the poem itself, okay? It's got 3 stanzas, so it follows that strophe kind of structure from Greek theatre, okay? The first stanza is all about growth. It's all about the autumn reaching the epitome, the beginning of autumn reaching the epitome of everything that's been grown and is about to be harvested. So if you can imagine things like apples on trees absolutely bursting, okay? So the opening stanza is all about this business of growth, is about things being at their most beautiful, at the pinnacle, okay? The next stanza looks at the idea of the harvest itself, okay? And it's kind of, it starts then to kind of be a little bit more obvious about what it's doing in terms of death. And then stanza 3 is death. Now, come on guys, you've learned enough so far. Literature, it's all about sex and death and food, okay? So we're never far from death with this damn thing. And then the stanza itself breaks down into this kind of structure here, where you've got these kind of opening lines and they establish the topic. And then what he does for the second part of each stanza is he elaborates, he kind of describes it, he looks at different ways of seeing it, he adds in loads of descriptions about it, so on and so forth, okay? And the 3 stanzas actually follow that structure. So the whole thing is structured as if it's following the strophes from Greek theatre. It has got an apostrophe in that, well, it is an apostrophe in that it is to someone, except it's to autumn this time. And then each stanza is structured actually quite rigidly in some ways. Okay, my lovelies? So really in today's video, it's just about an introduction. It's just about me kind of going, no, you are going to know as much as A-level students about this and what's going on. And really a bit about his context. Poor old John Keats. He was only 25 when he died. And it wasn't until years later that people really began to recognise his poetry and recognise it to such an extent that here we are in 2020, it's still being used in your anthology. His work is also being used at A-level. I have to confess, I think they could have picked a better one of his poems. However, okay, so there you go, my loves. Make any notes that you think, yeah, that would be useful, because any kind of context notes and any kind of structural notes are what you need, okay? So don't forget, for the exam, you've got to have 3 points of context, 3 points of structure, and then we've got to take out 3 ideas from the exam and saying what's being said, how is it being said, and then why is it being said like that? Okay, my lovelies, take good care.